Let's go. And Andries and I'm Jacqueline. We made a model about fear extinction that is done by the use of Propranolol. And we wanted to start today with a short introduction, what is fear and how it entails. Then we move on to the model. We will discuss some results, the verification of it, and we start a small discussion. So let's start with the basic. What is fear? Most will say it's emotion that is, let's say, that's activated by maybe something that is dangerous or where people could die on or die because of it. And people will also put in relation the fight or flight response to it. And basically, what is fear and why we have fear is for human survival, because you can decide to fight a bear, but you will most likely lose it, or you can fly from the bear. And that's that's just basically what fear is. However, fear can also be found in mental disorders, where the fear response is unregulated. And good examples, PTSD, where soldiers come back from the war and still have these stimuli from something, what triggers the fear response, the memory, but they are not able to regulate it, which means that they're like frozen for a few minutes, maybe for a few hours, which has a huge impact in their life and may have a decrease in their life quality. So that is an interesting phenomenon which we wanted to tackle, because apparently there is a way to do fear extinction so that people are able to normally function. So the neural basis of fear extinction starts in the brain, where you have the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And the stimuli just comes in the amygdala, where it gives a signal next to the hippocampus, where they are starting to recall the fearful memory that is stored in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, where then after the stimulus, the sensing of, after the stimulus, the sensing starts in the hippocampus, and then the memory is going to be recalled and the fear emotion gets loose and comes out. And this can be altered, if we go to the next slide, by administering propranolol. And what it does is it decreases the norepinephrine in the amygdala. So basically the beta adrenal receptors are blocked, which makes that people are not frozen in fear anymore, but they're open for reconsolidation. So basically, after an exposure to fear, people get propranolol administered, so they're open to not be frozen, but open to learning a new experience. So then after the administration of propranolol, they get exposed to that fear again, which creates a new memory, a memory which there's still some fear in there, but not as terrifyingly as it used to be. So then people are able to regulate their emotions and be less frozen in life, let's put it that way. And with that new memory, they can repress the old memory, where this eventually fear extinction will come up.
Okay, so I'm going to take it from here with the model. So how can we put fear extinction and administering propranolol in a model? So presence of fear and each brain area can be represented as a state, as well as propranolol and norepinephrine. And as we can recall, propranolol reduces norepinephrine, and the first and second order layer can be utilized to learning through the first and second order layers. Now let's move on to the model. Sorry. Looking at the base layer, we have a submodel for the fear mechanism with the amygdala, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, as well as the propranolol administration. Moving on to the first order layer, we have 3 W states with Hebbian learning, which influence the neural network. And then lastly, we have second order layer with the 8 W states. And those states are influenced by the administration of propranolol. So let's move on to the state matrix. So which states are actually in this model? So we have the base layer with 8 states, the first order layer with 3 states, and a second order layer with 3 states. And as you can see here, the neural model and the model for propranolol administration, and then the learning layer and the speed layer. Let's call it that for now. Moving on to the role matrix. So as we can see here, the second order layer is influenced by propranolol once again, and then the first order layer is influenced by the second order layer, moving on to the neural layer. And so the fear response, that is the one that it's essentially all about. Is fear decreasing? Is influenced by the amygdala, hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. Moving on to the weight matrix. So the weights of X3 and 4 are adaptive, once again, as they are involved in fear learning. And looking at the speed factors and the combination functions, those are once again modulated by the second order layer. So let's look at the different scenarios that this model gives. So first of all, we have fear extinction with propranolol. And it's important to mention, by the way, that propranolol uses a step 1 function because we want to simulate when propranolol is administered and when it is not present. So looking at the model, fear extinction with propranolol, as we can see here, X6 is the administration of propranolol, and X8 is the presence of norepinephrine. When propranolol goes up, norepinephrine goes down. And as you can see, the fear response in X5 also goes down when propranolol is administered, and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex go up because those states are learning now with that propranolol is administered and reconsolidation is taking place. So as you can see here, we can clearly see that the fear response is decreasing when propranolol is administered. Now we have a second scenario where no propranolol is administered and where no learning is present. And the difference between the model that we just showed and this scenario is that this model does not contain speed factors for norepinephrine and for the second order layer. So basically learning is Z of 0. So these are the Hebbian states, they just stay constant, and the layer second order layer also stays constant at 0. So here we can see that fear is clearly staying at a high level, and the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex are clearly are not learning, as contrary to the model here, where you can see that it's going up the neural areas and fear is going down. So for verification, we calculated the aggregated impact. As you can see, for all these states, they are below or pretty accurate. That is not the case for the Hebbian states, but that is because the speed factor is 0 And the speed factor has to be 0 to accurately calculate the aggregate impact. We also tuned the model, and we specifically tuned the neural areas and all the parameters that were tunable, with exception of the initial values. And we did 1200 to 1300 iterations, and we got a root mean square error of 0.11 with these corresponding values. We just finished this, so these are just the results that are in. And moving on to the conclusion, and back to you, Jacqueline.
So we concluded that propranolol does has an effect on your fear response once you start the therapy, we found in the literature. So by changing the activity in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, people are able to learn a new experience and memorize it, which help to what's the word again? Suppress the old memory, which makes them able to regulate their fear response and use that in continuation of life without being hampered by it. Next slide. So there are some points in our model that we think that is where you still have to think about is the time frame of the propranolol. That's a point that we chose what for us was logical from the literature, but in the literature it was hard to find when exactly is the right moment to administer propranolol, because it was important to first activate that fear response, then administer propranolol to make it able to learn and almost rewrite the old memory. So that's a big question. Is the time frame that we used really suitable, or is there is there also evidence out there that we should move it from what we chose? But on the bright side, we have used a lot of literature. So from what we have found, the propranolol does have an effect on fear extinction, and it's the closest to reality what we could aim for or get.